This is a Honda Odyssey. Normally these are 252 stroke. Story on this one though, it kind of came with some couple other, I bought like a package deal of Honda Odysseys. Check out one of my other videos, kind of see the whole lot of the stuff that I bought. But basically this one was just essentially a chassis. It was a rolling chassis. It had pretty much everything there. It had no motor, no clutches. It did still have the transmission on it and everything. But the goal on this one was just to kind of essentially put it back together. Like I said, the frame was essentially kind of free considering the package deal that I bought. It wasn't really worth much. This Razor seat, I happened to get this thing along with a Razor that I bought, so that was free. I did buy a motor for it for like 200 bucks off Facebook, and bought a set of Amazon clutches for it. So yeah, let's get into this. Let me kind of show you what it all took to get this thing running and driving again. I think the first thing I'm going to start on with this Odyssey is getting some brakes going. So I had a caliper floating around. This one was missing one. I did put a brand new cable on it. The old cable was kind of completely stuck. So this guy kind of slides right back in underneath here, and that cable routes up front, and then we'll sneak right in up here and go into the brake lever. So I think if we're gonna get this thing to drive, probably need to make sure we've got some brakes. So let's put that on quick. I've got this brake installed back in on here. That just mounts up underneath there. It's only held in with one bolt, and that cable routes up underneath. And then into the hand grip here. If I roll this guy, I've got brakes. I cut two pieces of square tubing, so this is gonna be my seat mount. My plan is I'm gonna notch this down and over so this sits down flush onto this rail. Do that on both sides. Then my plan is we'll just bolt this into the seat, and then we'll put the seat where we want it, and then we'll put some tacks right there, and then pop the seat back off and weld this thing in place, and our seat mount will be done. I went with square tubing instead of just a flat sheet, just as it's got some structure to it. So once you're bouncing around and stuff, that's not going to bend down underneath you. This will be nice and strong. Okay, so here's one of my seat mount bars in here. See how that sits down flush inside there. So once I get this where we want, we'll just weld all the way around this, and this thing will be nice and strong in there. Well, I made my mounts here, but I think I'm going to change direction. Once I put the seat in here, it kind of sits up too high that my knees kind of hit the steering wheel. But what I noticed is on the original Odyssey mount, those two bolt holes right there are basically the exact same bolt pattern as those two right there as far as width. So I think I'm going to try to do is set this down in there and run some bolts up from the bottom side and suck it into this plate, and everything else kind of suck down to the sides here, and then it'll sit a little bit lower down in there too. Well, it looks like I wasted my time. A Polaris Razor seat will apparently bolt right into a Honda Odyssey. It's kind of sucked down in there a little bit, but just have those two bolts holding down. It's sucked down into the frame, and it's pretty decent. So there's really no point in making any mounts. So this is the motor that I'm going to put in this thing. Picked this up off of Facebook Marketplace for 200 bucks. The guy said it should run, so I don't question why it wouldn't. Didn't hear it run though. But this is it's a Honda. Let's see, what size is this one here again. 340cc. The reason I kind of went after this one is the governor has already been deleted off of it right here. He also said he put stiffer valve springs in it, so the thing should be able to run hopefully 6,000-7,000 RPM, something like that. Debated going with a smaller, like 5 horsepower kind of Predator motor or something, but I don't know, thought it'd be bigger or better having a little more power. This one originally is like 10-11 horsepower or something. So the plan is to put it in here. I kind of just loosely put, well, one of my seat mounts in there. So we're gonna try to see how it's gonna fit in there. I think kind of my plan is to cut a lot of this bracing off. We'll pull out the old engine mount too, and then this rail over here, probably gonna have to pull this out. So I think the motor's gonna have to come this way a little ways to get those clutches to line up, and then we're gonna start bouncing or running into this bar right there. So that's probably the first steps, is to kind of cut out those brackets, and then probably this tube too, and then we'll make a couple pieces of square tubing to kind of set in there and try to get things situated and lined up. So the motor's setting down in here, and yeah, this tube's definitely gonna have to come off on the side to get this thing over far enough, and I think forward far enough. It's hitting on this tube and the recoil and everything there. Plus, like, my air intake's kind of right in the way too. So like with this clutch, this engine definitely needs to go farther over, and the way the secondary clutch works is it's going to open up this way towards the motor side, so we need to get that motor over more towards the right. So I think that tube's coming out. Okay, I just pulled out that old engine cradle and one of the engine mounts. I think my plan is actually to run some engine mounts kind of up this way in here. That should line up a little bit better, and then shouldn't run into any issues with the clearance on the belt or the clutches. So next step, we'll cut out that tube and some mounts and see if this motor fits in here a little bit better. All right, this is looking much better. I just laid a tube in there, kind of lengthwise in there. And I should have some nice clearance for the clutch. And my plan is to kind of get this kind of bolted in there and then leave these tubes extra long. And then once I got the clutch in there, basically kind of align all this. And then I can kind of tack it down in place where it needs to be. And then we'll have some motor mounts. So I put the motor back in here, cut a couple tubes just to set the motor roughly where it's going to be. Threw the primary clutch on it. So when I ordered these clutches, it came as a kit, primary and a secondary. I also got a belt with it, which my original intention was to use the belt that came with it. But after putting it on this, so this belt's a little bit smaller. And with the secondary clutch, so this bore diameter is the same size as the original Odyssey one. But the downside is if I threw this guy on here, this brake disc actually bolts into the secondary clutch. So I wouldn't be able to use this brake disc unless I either welded it into the back side of this or something. So what I'm running on here right now is this is original Odyssey belt, which obviously fits the secondary great. It's also a lot longer. So the belt that came with this, if I put it on here on this secondary clutch, it's only coming out to about here. I don't have enough room to slip it into the primary clutch too. Downside of this belt is it is a hair wider than the Amazon belt. So my concern is that this thing might want to kind of engage at idle and kind of walk along. But that might be something that we just figure out as we go. It'd be kind of nice to use this original secondary, because then I know the belt part's going to work great. Downside of this secondary, it is a lot smaller diameter, so my starting ratio is going to be a lot higher. So top speed might be a lot better with this clutch setup. Low end torque's going to be a lot better with this one. So I'm a little afraid that with this clutch setup, it's going to engage. There's obviously not a lot of room for change in diameter with the primary clutch, and that most of my speed's just basically going to be based off RPM. But if this motor actually revs reasonably high, that might be okay. So I think what I'm going to do right now is probably kind of get this motor situated where I want it to be, and probably try it out with this belt on there and see what happens. I'm going to try to leave this a little bit loose here so that it tries not to grab at idle, but we're going to see. Got some bolt holes drilled into my tubes there. Got this clutch pretty much lined up there with the secondary. I'm leaving this just a little on the loose side because, like I said, it's belt's a little bit wide for this primary clutch, so I'm afraid it's going to want to grab it idle. But I think I'm going to throw a couple tacks on my tubes on the front and the rear, bolt this motor down, and we'll try and start it up and just kind of see how it goes at idle. Okay, I got the engine mount tubes just kind of tacked in place there. Actually, the park brake actually works on it, so I've got that set. I've got it jacked up. I was going to try and give this thing a fire and just see if it does run. One thing, I don't have throttle hooked up or anything, but we'll get it started up, or hopefully it'll start. Here's my kill switch here. I'll just ground that out to kill it. We'll see what it'll do and see if it happens to drive the wheels at all at idle. We'll give it a little prime here. Supposedly it's been multiple years since it started. Gas is on. So we'll try choking it here. Start the fire. I didn't lie to me, that's good. I'm going to take the park brake off and see if it tries to rise. Well, it does run. My fear was correct, though. That belt is just a little wide on this thing. I'm kind of tempted to pull that secondary clutch back off and then maybe try and weld that brake to my new secondary clutch, so that way I can use the correct belt and everything. Yeah, I don't know if there's much else I can do with this belt. I just pulled the secondary clutch off and took off the brake disc. So this is how that brake works, is it bolts on to the back side of that secondary clutch. So here's my other one. See, it's definitely a lot smaller in diameter. But I think what I might do is get this nice and centered up on there, and then probably just plug weld those holes and see how it works. Well, I bit the bullet and I committed to it. So I welded the brake disc onto the new secondary. I kind of mocked it up. It seems to fit really well. So yeah, this is what we're gonna do. Let's hope it works. I have the engine tacked back in place with the other clutch set up on, so we'll start it up here and see if it wants to walk away at idle. Got the park brake set. up a throttle cable, and maybe we can take it for a spin. I have a new throttle cable routed down and around. It comes back up right here. So this is my little throttle butterfly right there. So it's idle. Oops. Basically full throttle, close, full throttle. My plan is to secure this cable down there, probably on that little Allen head bolt, and then I'm going to cut off the little barrel end on this, drill a tiny little hole through the back side here, poke that through, put a little clamp on the back side, that's where I'm going to pull from. And then this little throttle return spring, I'll make a little hook down here to hold onto this and return this throttle back to idle. Throttle cable's all installed, so I just put a little crimp end from an electrical connector on that cable. For the time being, I've just got a zip tie holding that one in place. I'll put some sort of cable clamp of some sort, hold that there. But full throttle, back to idle. Okay, so we've got running motor, clutches in, brakes work, we've got a throttle. I think it's time to see if it drives. I've got my motor mount all welded in place now. Focus in there. So when I had the original clutch on there, I cut this tube out because the motor had to come a little farther to the right because of the size of that secondary. But now with this other clutch, I think I can put this guy back in there. This just mounts and holds the wheel or the fenders on and stuff, and I've got those, and I had intentions of putting them back on, so I think I'm going to weld this tube back in there too. It should clear everything still, and then I can have some fenders back on this thing. It's like new again. Hardly tell it was even pulled out. The motor just sneaks inside there. Okay, I'm going to put on the rest of my roll cage tubes. These are all just kind of sitting in here right now. They all need fasteners to clamp back together, and put some fenders back on it, and then I think this thing's kind of done, and then probably wash it up a little bit. The roll cage is all bolted back together. Got a whole bunch of bolts. We're going to start putting the fenders back on here. Well, we got a complete Odyssey again. Got some fenders on there. Motors in place. Oh, I guess I gotta do a kill switch still. It's the only thing that's left. I got a little push button I'm gonna wire up on the handle there. Motors in there. Roll cage is back on. You bet. Kill switch is done. Wired that in there. Basically one end is just going to the spark lead coming from the motor. The other end is just grounded to the frame. Press the button, just grounds out spark. We are ready for a drive. All right, let's take this thing for a drive. Set the park brake. super responsive. It feels pretty much like a normal go-kart. I was kind of hoping it would rev a little bit more, but I'm sure the clutching has got to play a big factor with that. And I think it's a stock carb too. Nothing's been done to that. Maybe we'll go out on the grass here. Nice and comfy on it. We'll go down the road here and see if it'll kind of top out. Oh. It's quite as fast as the stock 250, but I think if I still had the stock secondary clutch on it, it'd probably be a lot more responsive with the motor and rev up a little faster. Well, I would say it's a success. There we go, lock my park brake. Kill switch works too. Oh, that's where I was smelling gas. A gas tank cap is not really sealing, it seems like. Thought I was kind of smelling that. Might have to do something about that. All right. Well, it does run and drive again, and that was the goal.